Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Small Charts, Big Data, how to elevate your data viz for a fast-moving audience in 2021. Yes. My name is Trivo. I am the senior graphic designer of the Ceros Inspire team. I have been at Ceros for a total of 2.5 years. Before that, I was a product designer and an editorial designer at a news media company called Mike, as well as a small media startup called Considerable. During my professional career thus far, I have worked with a lot of writers and editors on hundreds of data viz for many different kinds of projects, ranging from infographic editorial stories, bite-sized content for social media, to really highly complex data sets. With the ever-changing landscape of technology and how we consume media these days, the way we create database content also has to evolve. So I'm really excited to share with you insights that I've gathered over the years at Ceros and beyond. So let's get started. First up, I'd like to share with you 6 useful things that I use when I approach a data viz project. Number 1, tell me something good. You can't build a house without a good, solid foundation, and you can't build a good data viz without good data. Does your data tell a story? Is there something from your data set that the audience can learn from? Are there interesting points of peaks and valleys? What does the data mean to your audience, and how can that affect their work, life, career, family, or personal goals? What is the story you're trying to tell? That's a really big question to ask. Does your data support your story? Just because you have a story idea or a narrative doesn't mean the data will always support your theory. There are many times where we would start a project, we would come up with something in mind, thinking the data would elevate the idea. And then once we do the research, it just ends up becoming like a flat, uninteresting outcome. And that's really okay. That's really part of the research process. The important thing is understanding that there's a chance your data may not turn out the way you want it to be. So plan your story accordingly and know when to pivot if need be. Good data stories take a lot of time. There are some projects that, the research phase would take weeks, even like a month or 2 months to do before we can even enter the design phase. So it's an important step, making sure your data and your story is solid. It's a really long process, but it will be worth it when you get there. Take your time and don't rush this step, because it sets the foundation for the rest of your project. All right, got that? Number 2, what's in it for me? I like to think that anything, no matter how mundane or interesting, can be turned into data viz. Raise your hand if you have an Apple Watch, a Fitbit, Robinhood, or a bank account. I can't see everyone, but I'm gonna guess there's a lot of people here. And seeing your personal progress visualized is really helpful, because it's your health, your money, your investments, it's your data. It's interesting and useful to you. However, those data viz may not be as interesting to someone else other than yourself, right? Unless you're a hacker or, identity thief or something. I don't know. The same concept applies to your audience here. You want to show them something interesting, helpful to them. So it's really important to get to know your audience and their interests so you can produce useful content for them. Make them care, make them curious, make them want to dive into your data viz and your content so they can share with their friends. Got it? Number 3, data viz or matrix. Data viz or infographic design on its own is a whole graphic design genre. And I'll be lying if I told you I'm any kind of expert in that field. But what I can tell you is that the more complex your data viz is, the less likely the audience will understand and engage with it quickly. Take a look at these infographics. From an artistic perspective, these are really beautiful design work, but from a communication standpoint, they may not be as effective, right? Like if I see these in a museum or a gallery, I probably want to spend a lot of time looking at this and studying it and see where the lines are, what the colors mean, etc. But there's a difference between someone who already committed to pay a ticket, get on the train, visit the museum, commit to spending a few hours there and looking at the artwork, versus someone who's just browsing on their phone and trying to find something cool to pass the time, right? In this golden era of social media where everyone is competing for merely seconds of attention span from users, we don't want users to spend too much time having to decipher what the database means. We want the database to be a supplement to the stories, not an obstacle. So for the work that I do at Ceros Originals and Ceros Inspire, I keep the database structurally simple because those are the types of charts that people are familiar with. Number 4, priorities. In some cases, your data may come in as individual small sets that are easy to work with. In other cases, you may get data sheets that are like massive spreadsheets, 20 column, so many different numbers to work with, super complicated structures. While there's no one size fits all solution for that, here are a few things to consider. Present the interesting parts of your spreadsheet first and foremost. So think about what you need the client to know. If they only have time to learn 3 or 5 things from this massive spreadsheet, what would those be? And then present those points in interesting, highly engaging, visually stunning data viz. Consider connecting a few sub data sets into an interactive data viz. The cool thing about interactive data viz is you can place as many data sets that have the same X, Y axes on the same layout. So, things like time versus money, time versus population, etc. So pick a few data sets that have those values and see if together they can combine and tell a cooler story. That's something to consider. And then, once you do all of the fun, jazzy, wowy stuff, present your full data set at the end in some ways. So it could be a link out to a full PDF or a link out to a more narrowed down version of that you like the users to have access to. This could help provide further context on the data if they want, or promotes transparency with your users. Number 5, every size matters. Like it or not, we are living in the age of screens. So customizing your data viz for mobile is a must. When I worked at the other media company before I joined Ceros, I had to create a bunch of data viz that didn't have any like custom mobile desktop CMS or anything like that. So my data viz had to be rendered as images. And when put into the CMS system, that one image shows up on desktop and mobile. So it was a constant struggle having to make sure it was large enough for mobile, but also not ugly on desktop. Very challenging. So I do really appreciate the different desktop mobile layouts of Ceros. And some of you may think that, well, I know this project is not going to be viewed on mobile for sure. So why do I need to do a mobile version? Well, it shows that you're forward thinking. It will show that you care about your user experience and you want your work to be accessible wherever, whenever they are. And another huge bonus is that it allows you to resize your work for social media posts, such as Instagram slides or stories or Twitter. There's really no downside in creating a mobile version of your data viz. And then last but not least, take up a notch. Pie charts, line graphs, bar graphs, dot charts, etc. Those are very easily digested chart formats that everyone is familiar with. And while I agree that simpler is better, that doesn't mean they have to be boring, right? So think of them as the bones and now use your savvy design skills to add a little meat onto it. Consider drawing a design metaphor from your story. So, for example, if your story is about finance or personal savings or something like that, maybe your bar graph, instead of using rectangles, they could be a stack of coins, or using a pie chart. The circle could be a coin instead of just a round shape. These are simple design elements that helps connect your numbers to your design. Consider making something move. It can be really draining to look at charts and graphs all the time. So adding some playful, subtle animation could really help ease the eyes and make the data viz more visually compelling. I find the animation presets in the Ceros Studio really helpful for this step. And then once you check all the boxes, you're a pro. You're ready to go and create something awesome. Okay, and now I'd like to show you some of the data viz projects that I have done here at Ceros. Hopefully it will resonate with you or inspire you in some ways. So this first data viz is from a story that we did a while ago where we analyzed every script from Seinfeld to see who interacts with whom the most. So we worked with a writer named Andrew, and he came back with a massive spreadsheet of all of the data points. So I thought that because Seinfeld, the four main characters, I wanted to highlight the data that applies to these four people. So I pull them and create like the spinning pie charts that you see on the left. And then on the right is the full list that he provided in that spreadsheet. So this is an example of using two different types of charts together to create a hierarchy or to highlight certain parts of your data set. Next is a data viz I created for our Sex and the City analysis story, also from 2 years ago, I believe. This is a case where there were a lot of loose data sets that wouldn't make sense as individual charts. So I decided to combine them all into one interactive data viz. As you click around between the characters, you can see the dots populate. So by clicking around, you can compare and contrast who has more love interests than others. And then when you want to see everything again, click show all, and it comes back to where it was before. So using interactivity really helps breaking up the data set and help the users understand what you're trying to tell them better. Next one, this is less of a conventional data viz. This is a story about the Apple stock split last fall. An example where interactivity is the vehicle for the data viz. You have to constantly click through and see the apple being divided to understand the story. It's a highly customized in the interactive experience because the interactivity is unique to the story itself. You're splitting the apple as you go. So I thought it was a really interesting non-chart way to show like a different types of data viz. Next one is another way to showing percentage other than a pie chart. So it's the same layout, different data points, using icons, typography, and interactivity to make it more interesting. Next one is a Rotten Tomato score chart that we did a while ago for a Marvel story. So when you hover around, you see different pie charts being populated on this slice of tomato. This is an example of using design metaphor from the story, which is Rotten Tomato score and a visualization of a tomato. really, really simple, but it ties the chart into the narrative, if that makes sense. Another example of using design metaphor as charts, stack of coins instead of pie, instead of rectangles, since the story is about the FANG market, seems to make sense. This one is a simple double-sided chart that uses interactivity to highlight the details of each of the bars. So using hover states, you can avoid cluttering your data chart, your data viz, and only showing the values when someone hovers over it. So you can keep it clean and simple. Once they hover on it, they get more context. This one is a data viz about our Game of Thrones story. I did not create this one, but I thought it was really interesting. These are practically just, bar graphs, right? But instead of a rectangle, they use triangles. And by just making that one change, it ties into the story visually. The red and orange triangles look like a dragon's back, and the blue triangles look like icicles. So that really ties into the story. And that's it for small charts and big data. If we have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Okay. So if any questions, feel free to drop into the chat. Okay.
Thank you so much, Tree. It looks like we have one question from Katie. Where do you get your inspiration from for data viz?
Thanks for the question. So I draw my inspiration from, I look at a lot of like New York Times data viz, 538, also really love their work, some of the Vox stuff. And then just think about what can I apply that to the story. So, using design metaphors, like I said before, the stories about Rotten Tomato scores. So maybe using a slice of tomato instead